Careful scholarship illuminates its subject matter so as to reveal the underlying significance of the facts and the details it describes. Michael Beizer and Anne Komaromi's volume, A Time to Sow, provides an account of the Refusenik community in Leningrad during the period between the end of détente with the West and the beginning of the policy of perestroika. In other words, during the years when there was no realistic possibility of emigration from the Soviet Union. One of the major virtues of A Time to Sow is that it restores agency to the Soviet Jewish community. It dispels any notion of that community as passively waiting for external guidance or deliverance. Rather, it shows how it was they themselves who worked to establish a Russian Jewish identity during the years where they could not move, where they were neither welcomed at home nor were they able to move abroad. What the authors describe is a cultural political movement that was communal in nature, with its members looking inward, as it were, for support and direction. The authors carefully locate the stories of various refuseniks within the specific context of Soviet society at the time and the unique position of Jews in that society. What emerges is the story of how these refuseniks, in effect, created their own Russian Jewish identity where previously there was none. A movement that originally sought emigration as much because of economic realities as anything else, came to understand, as one refusenik put it, a free person needs to belong to some sort of group with shared traditions, with shared values, and shared worldview. A Time to Sow illuminates how the refuseniks of Leningrad went about creating that identity for mutual support, that identity for themselves through the establishment of an informal community for mutual support, Hebrew teaching, holiday observance, and the like. The great achievement of this book is to focus our attention not only on what these refuseniks resisted, but also on the identity that they built. It is a great accomplishment.
Thank you so much, Mark, for that very generous introduction. It's a great honor to be able to accept this award on behalf of my co-author, Michael Beizer, and myself. We want to express appreciation to the CJLA jurors and the organization for drawing attention to our book and for encouraging the wide range of writing on Jewish topics that could include our work, A Time to Sow, along with the other distinguished books represented here today. We're humbled to be among the awardees this year. Michael and I began talking about doing such a book on refuseniks, who are called Otkazniki in Russian, not long after our first meeting in Jerusalem in 2007, when I was researching Soviet underground press and culture and the history of the Jewish national movement in particular. The history of refuseniks in Leningrad was Michael's own history. In the early 1980s, he led an unofficial historical seminar on Jewish topics, and he also led excursions around the city to show people sites and explain the suppressed Jewish history. Michael wanted me to mention the two people to whose memory we dedicated our book. One of them is Sir Martin Gilbert, British historian, official biographer of Churchill, who was one of the Western observers who became engaged and went to extraordinary lengths to support Soviet Jews borders were denied. Gilbert visited Refuseniks, including Michael, in Leningrad. He wrote a book about the people he met, whom he called the Jews of Hope, Евреи Надежды. This was a riposte to the Jews of Silence by Elie Wiesel 20 years earlier. And he encouraged their scholarly efforts, the efforts of the Refuseniks in their publications abroad. This was something that was hugely important for Michael and for others. Abba Taratuta was the other person to whom we dedicated the book. Abba died not too long ago in Haifa. It was an honor and a pleasure for me and my family to get to know him and his wife, Ida. They had been leaders among the Refuseniks in Leningrad for many years before making Aliyah, arranging support for underground ulpans, for Hebrew learning, for seminars, community holidays, and samizdat, or self-published editions on Jewish topics. He inspired so many Soviet Jews through his personal example of choosing not to be afraid and telling people, don't be afraid, taking pride in Jewish culture and identity, gathering and encouraging people to gather at every opportunity with fellow Jews, and helping people to learn, to celebrate, and to create solidarity in Jewish community. After making Aliyah, he collected documents from the history of the movement and created an organization with a website called Remember and Save to share the knowledge about those who had been involved on both the Soviet side and the Western side, and to show the impact of what they had done. Because this is the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards, I want to mention that in the book, we briefly describe the visit of the Canadian parliamentary delegation to Refuseniks in 1984, and we note Irving Abella's attendance at a Yom HaShoah commemoration ceremony in Leningrad on April 17, 1988. As we know from Wendy Eisen's valuable book, Count Us In, there was lots of Canadian participation in the movement to support Soviet Jewry. And more broadly, generations of Canadians, parents and kids, will remember how central the topic was to Jewish community life in the 1970s and 1980s in particular. This book is intended to shed more light on what those Soviet Jews thought, said, and did. Far from silent victims, and not only people in need of help, Soviet Refusenik activists manifested courage, resilience, creativity, and pride as Jews amidst a reigning culture of assimilation and anti-Semitism, both popular and official. In doing so, I dare say these Soviet Jews set an example that seems only more relevant to us today. I also want to take the opportunity to thank everyone at University of Toronto Press and our editor, Stephen Shapiro, there, who helped make this book a reality. And I want to also thank the family that provided so much support for me and who are here today, my husband, Leonid, and daughter, Isabel, for coming and being with us to celebrate. Thank you.